This is the Middle-earth Philosopher. In the last video, I discussed my opinions on major events in Middle-earth history that qualified enough as age-ending conflicts. Events so catastrophic and having ramifications so massive that they effectively signified a massive change to what had happened before. Also during that video, I alluded to events that I thought could have or maybe even should have qualified as age-enders as well, but within canon did not, depending how you define canon given the ambiguous nature of Tolkien's writings paired with his letters. So, this is a follow-up to that point, specifically two events that I believe should be regarded as at least Ragnarok level events. The Battle of Unnumbered Tears of the First Age, and the downfall of Numenor during the Second Age. Now, I'm going to assume that most of you are already familiar with the details of these, so I will try not to mansplain them again more than I need to make my points. The Battle of Unnumbered Tears, aka Dagor Nerniath Arnordiad, if I mispronounced that, my apologies, is more than just one of the many conflicts that occurred during the Beleriand Wars towards the end of the First Age, but was the final conflict between the previous war's main factions, that being the Beleriand alliance of the Noldor and their Mordor allies, and the armies of Morgoth. That explanation alone should give one reason why this could have been an age-ending event. The two factions have been going at it for centuries at this point, with several victories and losses between them, yet nothing conclusive. Despite heavy losses and even a Nodoran High King and 3 princes dead, all remain firmly in place, with the only real change being that the Siege of Angband was lifted during one of the previous conflicts. Unnumbered Tears, however, is different, being hyped up like the War of the Last Alliance at the close of the Second Age, and comes off feeling like the Battle of Pelennor Fields, only Mordor won. There is a desperation written into the conflict in the Silmarillion that isn't there with the previous or latter conflicts of the First Age. For all involved, everything was on the line, and all the chips were on the table. There was zero holding back of any reserves from all sides. And the war ends with the final and total defeat of the First Age Noldor and their allies, closing out their arc as a major superpower in Middle-earth at that point, small holdouts notwithstanding. The entire north is now owned by Morgoth. The human realms, with the exception of the Halidin, are either wiped out or occupied, and the only elven nation to actively participate with the Noldor, the Philatrum, are taken out as well not too long after the main defeat. The war was so important that the published Silmarillion says that despite the curse of Mandos foretelling the utter defeat and exile of the Noldor, that the Noldor actually had a chance of winning, despite numbers being against them, dragons, Balrogs, and so on, factors that have often turned the tide against them in the past, and that the only real reason that they lost was that the majority of the Easterling faction betrayed their allies in the Eastern Front. Pause. That this battle was literally flying in the face of fate itself is a pretty damn big deal, and one I think that is often overlooked or underappreciated. You think that would qualify for a Ragnarok level event, an age-ending event. Now, the second event in question isn't exactly a battle, but rather a global cataclysm. Numenor's fall from the literal face of Middle-earth should most definitely qualify as ending the Second Age. Consider, you have the world on the verge of a massive war between the reigning superpower of Middle-earth that even Sauron couldn't take head-on, with the powers and armies of Valinor, something even Morgoth himself never attempted. And again, that event being instigated by mortals. Now, don't get it twisted. I don't think Numenor would have won had the war actually happened and the Valar and Maiar had gotten directly involved. However, I do believe they would have beaten the Elven armies because, other than War of Wrath, they had no real experience in war and they lacked the drive and desire to wage war that seems natural to mortals. Yes, they were powerful because of their living in Valinor, and them being elves overall. But then again, so was the Numenorian army, having been blessed by the Valar themselves when relations between them were better and almost as intelligent. Arguably, more so if you want to argue Sauron's influence and teachings on the Numenorians, and that he seems to have eluded the Valar consistently, and with them having no idea what the hell he was doing until he actually does it. Numenor would have lost for sure, but Valinor would be forever ruined, the last vestige of a primordial Middle-earth at its most pure. The most important qualifier, however, was the reshaping of the world, or, put bluntly, the direct intervention of Uru himself. No other time or conflict has ever required that the One get his hands dirty. Not the Battle of the Powers, not the Neath Nornordiad, not the War of Wrath, nothing. And now, here he is, at the behest of the Valar, or because of it, laying down their authority and exercising his power in extreme force. The result brings a long pause to the tumultuous Second Age, and destroys the rebellious Numenorians, removes Valinor completely to who the hell knows where, and creates a massive power vacuum in its wake that isn't finally resolved until the War of the Last Alliance centuries later in the same age. Now, come on. This is a literal apocalypse. Why is this not ending out the Second Age? Well, here's why I believe Numenor's destruction and Unnumbered Tears didn't make the list for a Ragnarok level event. First is that despite the removal/deaths of major characters and players during both events, for the most part, they were still there in one form or another. The First Age Noldor still had holdouts in Nargothrond and Gondolin, along with Doriath still being around, plus the Green Elves and the Dwarves in the Blue Mountains. All of them were still in power. Second was that the Silmarils, the cause of the wars in the first place, were still out and in play, and that's an issue that needed to be resolved. It was close, but just missed it. As far as Numenor is concerned, the same reasoning applies, though a reasoning by the skin of its teeth. Yes, Valinor had been forever removed as a viable faction from Middle-earth, but Numenor as a people, by the grace of Uru, were not completely wiped out either, and Sauron was also still around, though he does physically die. The Second Age Noldor, under Gil-galad, are also still around, becoming a co-reigning superpower with the exiled Numenorians. The world has greatly changed, but much of the political structures are pretty much still in place until the Last Alliance. In that particular conflict, as I mentioned before, the board has completely changed along with its players. It lacked a global catastrophe, thank God, but half the kings that went to war were killed. Sauron dies, again, but from this point on, now works entirely under the radar during most of the Third Age. The Noldor elves, for the most part, ceases to be a superpower, with many and or most of them leaving for the west. But even though that they are still formidable in their own right, they have little to no interaction with the world thereafter. The Sylvan elves seem to forsake nearly all interactions with other powers in the world on a political level, at least until the Battle of Five Armies and the later War of the Ring. They may still interact with them on merchant levels and trading here and there, but nothing massive or major like what happened during the Second Age, before the fall of Numenor. And the Third Age is largely contested between human factions during proxy wars, even though those proxies were also Sauron's proxies. But again, Sauron is not directly involved this time around until the very end. It is for these reasons that I believe these two events could arguably qualify as ending out their respective ages, but ultimately did not. Though, to be fair, if they had, it would result in what? 2 intermediate ages between them all? It's a total of 6 ages canon-wise? I don't know, you do the math. But, what do you think? Do you disagree or agree with this assessment? Do you have a completely different take on what should be a age-ending event, or do you think that these are perfectly fine and should have been added to the list? Let me know in the comments below. And this is the Middle-earth Philosopher. You guys have a good day.